Welcome to Deciphering Growth, the show that explores mental health from every angle. We bring you conversations with personal opinions, stories, and practical tips. We aim to break down the stigma and help you live your best life. So please sit back and let's dive in. Before we begin, we want to remind our listeners that this podcast represents the opinions of Tiffany Graves, Eric Stone, and the show's guests. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Please consult a healthcare professional for any medical questions. The views and opinions expressed are our own and do not represent those of our workplaces. Listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content does not establish a doctor-patient relationship.
All right, we're back today to talk more.
Good morning. Good morning.
Yeah. Today we're looking at social media and kind of like its impact on men's mental health.
Yeah. So with men's mental health, I think we just don't really talk about men's mental health enough, which is kind of interesting because I've heard some people say like I hear about that all the time, or it's discussed, all these things, but it's not talked about beyond a surface level. Typically, like, oh, like how are you living the dream, or oh, hey, how's your mental health? Oh, I'm sure. So it's like we're not really getting beyond the surface, is what it's feeling like to a lot of people. So I know, Tiffany, we both obviously see male identifying and presenting clients. Do you maybe see some of the similar things that it's like not as in depth as maybe people are thinking they've gone with their men's mental health?
So I actually, interesting enough, like I found that there's a shift to people willing to
Okay.
try therapy, and they're like, it seems like more people are encouraging us to talk about this, so I thought I'd test it out. And I'm like, oh, that's great. Like, I love that you're willing to dip your toe in. um and then when we really get into it, I'm finding like, wow, like the male population has been robbed of so much like emotional knowledge and like just general compassion and like being humanized, because they're held to such ridiculous, like, you have to be masculine in this way, you have to perform in this way, you have to provide in this way kind of standards, that it's almost for some individuals like a whole entire relearning process of like what it means just to be like human.
Yeah, I just think like when we think about like men's mental health, I think we think about like, how do I say? So you just have to hold me accountable, Tiffany. So this is like we never like pre-record to those who are listening, like we do it live. So I'm just gonna ask that you hold me accountable because I don't want to be mansplaining or like toxic masculinity up in here as we talk about this. But I would say that we talk a lot about body image from the view of female identifying or presenting individuals and how social media creates unrealistic body standards for women. But I do not think we're talking enough about unrealistic body standards for men. And so, like, just diving into this a little bit, like, it is maybe if you're a heterosexual male, like, one, you're seeing unrealistic body standards if it's all Instagram models and influencers, or those types of people are who you're looking at. And that is oh, that's what's attractive, that's what's real. When in reality, like, there's a reason there's only a few major influencers, but the same thing could be true for fitness. If you're looking at some of these male influencers, I did do a little search. I'm not going to plug any of them because I don't believe in any of them, but there are some male influencers that are like essentially, 12 pack abs, biceps the size of my head. And some of you all have not seen my head. I have a gigantic head. So that's really saying something for them. They're just gigantic. And they're plugging steroids. And what they're plugging is like diets or lifestyles that many people just don't have access to.
Yeah, and I've encountered that professionally and personally with male individuals that I interact with of their that subcon that not subcon well maybe it is words that internal battle of like, you know, I'm not muscular enough, or my arms aren't big enough, or like I don't look a certain way. And just going again back to what Audrey had mentioned in our last podcast of like, you know, maybe your body can't achieve that because genetically and biologically your body isn't built that way.
Yeah. I mean, or just even just be like, you know, we don't have the same access to funds, you know, like sometimes I think you could pick insert movie, insert actor does a fitness movie or an action role, and it's like, oh my God, their transformation. And usually they'll say something like, oh, I just switched my diet. I ate eggs and I did this movement. Now, there's probably some people that's true, but there's just absolutely no way. Like what has happened is they have like professional dietitians, like professional trainers. They're having professional chefs like tailor everything, and that's not realistic for many people. Like honestly, almost anyone other than like the ultra wealthy, they could maybe follow that, but also timing, also so why I want to talk about this though is men's mental health. Uh, we just have a lot of issues. So like, one being that males are more likely to self-medicate. So I did a little bit of research review from the UK, love our global perspective that that they are noticing some of the same trends of self-medication, but that also men are nearly 3 times more likely than women to attempt suicide. And in the United States, it is the very similar. Sadly, it is well, I guess perspective would is that it is four men in the United States are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than women. So we really do have a male mental health problem, and in social media, you're typically not seeing the depth of some of that. And we could make some guesses or hypotheses on this, but what are the things if we're just thinking from United States, typical culture? So I'm going to stereotype for a minute. I know this isn't everyone's experience, but typically young men are getting taught to toughen up, rub some dirt on it, scrape your knee, get up, get back in there, make the play, go to practice, toughen up. And maybe women presenting identifying folks are getting more chances to practice their feelings, self-regulating, sorting through them. And if you stack that from like we'll say age 5 to 20 or something, like it's very different when you're entering social media for the first time. Maybe you have some emotion regulation skills, maybe you have some perspective that not that a teenager's having maybe very wise, insightful perspectives all the time, but it gives someone more of a chance going into that world with a little more of a formed sense of self. I don't know what you think, Tiffany.
Yeah. I think I feel like it's one of those things that like I want to say a lot about, but it feels contradictory because I don't have the same experience and like perception that a male would, like receiving and like processing those messages.
Yeah, well, that's fair. I won't try to set you up to speak from the male perspective. I think one of the things I've noticed just in my own personal life, friendship circles, family circles, and also like working with male clients is very often, and I know women identifying presenting folks can do this as well. They will pick work over their own health. I think, maybe Tiffany, this is where you can tag in. I would say some of my female identifying clients were more likely to pick family over work. But I have seen that like with my male clients, they will pick work over health. I'm not saying they'll pick work over family, but they're usually the hierarchy is family and then work, then health, based maybe like we shift the priority. So again, it's very
Mhm.
hard to pin down for all people of one group, but just there are some data trends we can look at and see.
Yeah, yeah, and based on like just speaking from numbers perspective, there is for sure a very skewed number chart for men self-medicating and kind of like I guess the metaphor I always use is like putting their head in the sand and just moving along because that's what they've been like taught to do.
Yeah. And there's a lot of like waiting till it's really bad. So I worked as a substance use counselor all my professional career, even from internship, and a lot of the time with drinking, people aren't coming in when it's like, I'm drinking like 5 beers every day, and if I don't, I get angry. People are waiting till it's like tremors, shakes, fired from job. That is typically when people are like, "Oh, okay, I have a problem." Same with anger. Like, "Hey, get out of the house. Go somewhere else. You can't be here. You got to get this in line." Or, "Hey, you can't, just not pay any attention to me, do anything for our relationship or our family and have." It sounds really silly. Maybe some people listening are like, "That's ridiculous," but this is happening like every day by the thousands, by the millions in therapy and outside of therapy. And like, I'm going to just call myself out. I was a male therapist in training, learning about doing therapy, providing therapy. And I'm going to be real. I still was like, yeah, therapy's cool, but like, I'm tough. Like, I don't need it. Like, that's for like people who need to go to the hospital. Like, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm not at that level. Well, yeah, that was not the right answer. The right answer would have been to work on some things when it was closer to it, easier, happening in the moment, not waiting years to come in. But that is a trend I would say in my practice. Some of the patients are coming in faster, but some of my older, from a certain generation, they are waiting a long time to come to therapy, if ever. And I'm not judging them. I'm glad they're there, but it is harder than coming in when something's like a week, month, year old type of issue.
Yeah, yeah. It's very commonplace what I see too. Whenever people do come in and it's kind of like it's hit the extreme of like it's impacting everything. So like I have no choice but to like do something about it versus people coming in and being like, this isn't like devastating of an issue, but like it'd be cool to work on it. It almost like, and you would have more perspective on this than me, but at least from what I'm seeing, it almost seems like the male population has this either expectation or they've been told like it's not a
Ooh,
problem until
yeah.
someone tells you it's a problem.
And I think I'll be real, it's usually multiple people having to say it and say it multiple times. I'm struggling to think of too many of my clients. Like one person said something one time, and that was there's just it can be a positive to be stubborn and strong-willed. Like there's a lot of things one can do if they're not gonna easily give up, but having it channeled another way of not easy to change or give up and very set, that can be very challenging and problematic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, question for you, Eric.
Mm,
I'm gonna start my question rounds.
maybe we need to start pre-recording these. So I'm just kidding.
How do you think social media has impacted either in a positive or negative way, like how men view or think about like mental health in general?
Oh God. Sorry, I said that out loud. Oh man, it's such a good question. On the positive end, I think, like the crisis line is everywhere. I think a lot of people understand that there are crisis lines and that like people don't have to be alone. Um, I think that also like, I don't know, I picture some of my veterans, like I just watched some really powerful videos of veterans that have dealt with mental health coming back from deployment or working through their trauma. And I mean, it's some of the most powerful things I've ever heard in my life. And so I think, that resonates. So I think that can be something, and I think through some of my clients, that has been stuff that's impacted them positively. I think I kind of just jumped right into the negative about the body image, the unrealistic standards. Like, I'm not going to do this today, but if I just think about the show Bluey, lots of dads. I'm gonna throw myself in here. Like we love Bluey. It's a hilarious. It's such a good show. It's funny. It's just calming. But if I ever actually compared myself to like the dad in Bluey, I would feel like such a plastic bag because that dad has like 7,000 games. He's rarely ever frustrated. He doesn't usually make a mistake. And obviously it's a show, but That is in essence what we're doing when we're on social media. Like if I go on, I'm like, oh, this dad like has the whole yard set up for Halloween, or oh, this dad like has never been late to dinner, or this dad does the, like I think you can just find these unrealistic comparisons. And so one of the things I kind of like to always remind people is that we have this thing, it's from social psychology, so I think I got to nerd out for just a second, but like we do social comparisons. So we can't control when we're on Facebook and we see a picture and we're like, oh, I feel better about myself because their costumes look worse than mine. You can't control that. Or if you're like, oh, wow, those look better than mine, you can't control that initial response. But what usually happens is we are not sitting with something like that for a few seconds. We're like actually sitting there, thinking it over, picturing it, and then starting to have a reaction. And that can lead to other things. And the challenging part of the algorithms is if you sit and scroll and pause on something like an image like that, it's going to start bringing you more images like that. And then that's going to, so it can be very powerful if you're using it for like, some of my clients are in recovery. And so some of the positives are my clients in recovery see a lot of supportive things and things that call out some of the stereotypes and negative things. And that's really helpful for them. It also can be challenging if it's negative engagement and engagement that's not positive. So I think there's just a lot of risk. I mean, have you heard anything or with like your clients or learned anything with your clients at all, Tiffany?
Yeah, I will say I think actually here recently the thing that I've been hearing, and it's actually been refreshing for me to hear, is that um people, younger generations are encouraging each other, male in the male atmosphere, to just talk more about things. And I've noticed that's been bringing in a lot of people. When I say people, male population specifically, and they'll mention like, yeah, like it's been like more people are encouraging me to like talk about emotions. They're encouraging me to talk about things, and it's new and scary and uncomfortable. And I'm me as a professional, I'm like, this is great. I love that like we have a new blossoming generation who is like supporting each other, male population wise, to like be more open because you are human first.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think that's another piece of it. I was just thinking like we can do anything to excess. And so I think one of the things that I'm thinking about, there's this stereotype of young males, like, I don't know, you're gonna have to call me out. I know I've said this several times, but like I have noticed this phenomenon about young men who like aren't in a relationship or married or have a career, like the internet is very hard on those young men. So like this idea that if you're living with your parents to save money because, oh, I don't know, the economy is completely fucked. And so maybe you got a degree and then you couldn't find a job in it. And then you're like, oh, for status, I can pay and have my own place, or I could be trying to prepare for my future. But I would say the internet, when that story, that vignette I'm describing is a male, is a little harsher than if that was a young woman presenting for a person. It's like, oh, I'm trying to get established, trying to go. And I think some of that is a stereotype. This idea that, like, oh, I live in my mom's basement and I'm a loser type thing. Like, there's just this, some of it's a meme, and memes can be funny, but there is a stigma, I think, about if you're not air quotes a success. I don't think it's taking into account a lot of things. Like I just picture the college students who went through COVID. And so their college experience was robbed, or like graduating into COVID. It's like you didn't have the same options. And like, I don't know. And I guess I just don't think it's fair. So like I am frustrated because I don't think that dialogue is fair, because I think we could, I'm not gonna be ageist, but like we could have the memes of like the older generation being like this generation's lazy. That's always been a pattern in history. And it's like, people aren't being lazy. They literally can't afford to get into a home. No matter where they're going, the cost of everything is higher to get in. It's harder to get established and get launched these days. So, and I'm like, I want to be really clear. I'm not saying women should face the same pressures that I think men are getting. I think the solution is like, let's bring it down, the judgment we're having of each other, and this like, oh, they're a loser type of thing that I think people are like kind of sharing a little more free or carrying more than they think they are.
Yeah, yeah. I think in hearing you talk about something that comes to my mind that always has frustrated me is sometimes there's that perception that women, whatever the reason they're choosing to stay at home with their parents, can get away with it because that they have that caretaking, air quotes on caretaking kind of role. And it's
Oh,
like, well, men can have the same role. Like some of them might, not only for financial reasons or whatever other reasons, they might choose to stay with their parents because they need to take care of their parents. And there is that like shame and guilt that the internet and social media can place on the male population for doing that, when in reality, it's like, it's a very human act to engage in when you care about your parents or like other individuals in that way.
yeah. I Yeah, I just wish we weren't judging each other. And the really crappy part is when we're doing downward comparisons. So we're like, oh, I have better costumes than them, or oh, I'm smarter than them. You can boost your self-esteem short term doing that. The problem is eventually we start to look up and then it's like, oh my God, we feel bad. That's why I was calling out those action movie stars who have these wellness plans. Like that's not real life. Like that's not my real life. I'm not only going to be able to focus on physical training and have every other thing in my life taken care of so I can be cool in a movie role. That could be interesting. I don't think I'm cut out for that life, but it's just that's not going to happen. But if I compare myself and hold myself to that standard that's unrealistic, that's not going to help me. The other thing I just want to say is that I think we have really harshly judged young men hobbies and young men's self-care ideas as like dumb or lazy or stupid, like watching sports or playing
Mhm.
video games. Like now, I'm not saying that we all need to let every husband watch football all weekend, every hour, and there's nothing they can do. I'm not saying that, but it is kind of disheartening that like what is a healthy outlet watching a football game? What is a healthy outlet playing some video games and letting off steam is air quotes bad because it's not yoga, it's not crocheting or something else. That now, do we need physical movement? Absolutely. Can people do too much? Yes, but I just feel like even just the discourse sometime about things can be very like just dismissive of like that's helpful. Almost like, if I didn't enjoy a self-care activity, I was like, oh well, it's terrible, no one should do it, it's the worst. It's like, well, it doesn't work for me, but it may work for someone else. I don't know what you think on that one, Tiffany, but I've noticed that.
That one, I won't lie, pisses me off to no end because video games can be such an amazing avenue for people to process through different mental health issues. Um,
Exactly.
a really great one, I don't know if you've heard of the series of the God of War series.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That character starts out as an angry individual who like beats his way through life, and just the two most recent games that were released really talk about him going back and processing through his trauma. And as you play through the game, you get to learn different ways to like cope with the trauma and like the actions that you went through. And that can be a really good external way for someone to process through something like that they're going through. On the flip side, you have other games where you can log in and you can just like farm plants and water plants all day. That can be another great peaceful mind escape for someone. So not to get on like a side tangent or my like soapbox, but it really frustrates me when people use the video games are lazy, video games are helpful, video games are wasting your brain space, when I'm like, that's a load of bullshit.
It is. I mean, I don't know. It'd be like, I just don't know. Like, I get what people are saying. There's probably some fair critiques, but it would be like saying any little girl that plays with a doll is being in the patriarchy. I don't know. I just feel like it's just too strong. It's too far. I get the point. I get what they're saying. But one of the things I just think it kind of relates is like we can have excessive internet use and feel very isolated. But there's a quote. It's actually, I think, from like very recent, like maybe like in the past couple of weeks, but Shayna Woodley came out and said that like pornography is like fast food, junk food compared to what sex is really like. And I just think that's very interesting because I just think like that kind of gets at some of the stuff with the internet, but it's specifically for men. That there's just all these different healthy internet things that can happen, but also, problematic things that can happen. So pornography on its own isn't evil, but like any compulsive use, or if we're like, thinking that is full reality. So I just think there's a lot of good that can come, but there's also a lot of challenges, but also it's like it's not enough. I think we're all finding that post COVID and like this next wave, like we're all wanting more than Zoom calls and virtual likes on something. Like we're wanting more beyond that. And I think it can be helpful for people to kind of acknowledge that that's not enough. Like having 30 likes on something is not the same as someone being able to come to your house and feed your cat. Anything we've missed so far, Tiffany? Anything at all?
Ooh, I had a note to ask you about. What have you been noticing about the shift from traditional ideas of masculinity, toughness, and emotional suppression to this more modern understanding of mental health?
Depends on sorry, it's funny. It's an ugly laugh I just did. It really depends on what side of life you're viewing this from, I would be honest. So I think if you're um, maybe more conservative leaning, you may see it one way. If you're more progressive leaning, you may see it another way. I think there is actual truth on both ends of how they're seeing some of this, but I want to be specific. I'm not saying that you know, progressive leaning folks don't want men to be resilient and gritty and tough and powerful and push through things, nor do I think conservative leaning people think that, any emotional intelligence is weak. I think a lot of people honestly are more in the middle and see the value in this. I think it's tough for them to transition. So I've noticed people seeing more value in it. I've noticed a lot more men wanting to not be the stereotype of mad men as fathers, and like these philandering absent fathers is the stereotype I think of in Mad Men. Great show, but they show it very good. Don Draper, great actor, terrible human, great actor, great show, terrible father, like probably one of the worst. I'm just gonna not spoil the show, but it's like if you're ever wanting to just don't watch that show if you're not wanting to get majorly triggered by dads who are absent. Um, and I think people are just wanting to be more invested, more present. That's what I've been noticing with my clients. So regardless of if they're, a veteran or conservative or progressive or really any part, like people are wanting to be more emotionally intelligent and wanting to be able to regulate better. That's how I'm seeing it with my clients. But also I think just like my fellow dads, my fellow younger, just the males I know in my circles, like we're trying to regulate more, we're trying to be more present, we're not trying to be these pothead stereotypes that you see, I think, in like 80s movies of like what men are beyond young 20 somethings. Hopefully that answers the question. I tried not to dodge it.
That definitely answers my question. Um, I have a few more questions to run by you. For you, how does comparison culture, like trolls and other negative responses that you see online, impact either clients or like personal individuals in your life that like may or may not encounter that type of stuff?
um Rage bait gets a lot more of my male clients. So like the algorithm showing an article on the other side of your political leanings that's just meant to get you upset. Um, I think that's probably because us males are allowed to feel anger is the most comfortable emotion. So a lot of things will bring anger or try to pick at that anger. Even sports talk radio is a great example of like you're trying to piss people off or engage their anger so they stay and listen to your show. Um, I think social media, I don't know. there's people who are using it a lot, and then I think there's a really wide range that you probably see as well for female presenting identifying folks. I just think there's like people who are either like all in or all out. There's not as many medium use social media people that I'm aware of. Like I think it's like pretty divided. But if you're thinking about trolls, I think I've noticed a lot of the older males are still a little aggressive, and they may not think that they're being aggressive, but they're a little more aggressive with their online interactions. They're more angry or bothered by some of the stuff. Um, but I think in 2024 we're all kind of realizing it's not okay just to troll, like randomly try to harass people online. Um, but I say that, and then I know that like to be a female influencer is to get creepy, disgusting, inappropriate messages all day, every day. And so I do think like we can't talk about men's mental health on the internet of like why someone thinks that, you know, sending not like flirty, but like really obscene messages to celebrities is going to result in anything. Like, I don't know. I that part of masculinity I don't really get, but to say it's not a part, I don't know. I just feel like that would be fake to say like, oh yeah, like there's just you can see the comments. I mean, go to any female pop singer, and if they ever share what they're getting, I mean, I'm sure it's awful. Like I don't envy them for that at all.
Yeah. Yeah, there for sure is a different, like, demeanor of how, like, men and some women interact with female
Yeah,
influencers over male influencers, or just males and
yeah,
females in generals online.
I just think men like there's a reason there's a lot of memes like I choose the bear because there's just a lot of behavior online by some men. Not all men, but some men are really nasty and awful online, and that's where I'm trying to be more grounded today because it's not all of them, but it makes sense that what are we going to talk about? Well, it's these bad actors, these bad, you know, people who are causing lots of issues. That's going to get more of the attention.
And then another question that, like, came up for me as I was, like, doing some of this research, and I was really curious. Um, what do you notice about your TikTok or social media algorithms that differ from your wife's?
Oh God. Well, as you know, your algorithms are personal, so I will answer that. But I have to say, one of my favorite things to do on mine is to watch like usually these like talking heads, political figures talk about their algorithms are targeted at them. And it's like all of these scantily clad women and all of these things are coming, you know, on my feed, and it's impossible. And it's just such a shame. And like they don't realize that they're getting those ads because they have stopped and engaged with those types of content. I'm sorry, it just makes me laugh every time because I'm just like, I don't think you realize that you're like broadcasted to the entire world, like what you're looking at on your phone. Um, my algorithm's pretty weird. It is a lot of Chapel Roan, and pretty much I have seen half of every video, probably half the videos about Chapel Roan memes or the songs Pink Pony Club. Big fan of the Plankton version. But my difference is I get a lot of memes and some mental health and some like newsy type things versus my wife is getting a little more lighter hearted, but that's also I think a little bit of personality driven. But I do find it funny the things that are trying to engage the male gaze. And I again I'm very intentionally not plugging any of these influencers because I think it's kind of stupid just to be honest, but like they'll have accounts where it's very obvious they're using their sex appeal to, you know, engage content, and that's literally the only thing. There's no other layer between, but maybe that's the patriarchy, and maybe that should be fine that someone is. I don't know, but it's just like you see things like that. So I think there's just a little more ways people try to engage a little differently. I don't know. I'm not going to stereotype for all people, but I find those accounts kind of funny, but also very interesting. But I don't know if we have enough time to talk about all those.
The reason I ask, I had just had an interaction with my partner and he was really frustrated. He's like, I just want to look at funny, stupid videos. And I keep getting these stupid targeted ads for like sexual content. And he's like, there's no way to like turn them off. Like, there's no way to like get rid of them. They just randomly pop up. And I was like, oh, that's interesting because I don't encounter those even if I was like I tried to like Google on my algorithm and like even doing that like my algorithm like wouldn't really pull up the same kind of content that was being advertised. And I was like, this is really interesting. I almost to the point it was like, I wonder if I create like a male account where I say like I'm a male, if that would have an impact.
Yeah, and I'm sure they're like adjacent hashtags or like topics, but yeah, I would say there's just a ton of content that is like either like trying to be very subtle about this the sex appeal or sexual content or just very direct about it. And it's not new. Like, this is like from the beginning of advertising, like they've tried to use sex to sell products or there's a really interesting documentary on the WWE and Vince Mahon and how awful of a person he is, and I won't spoil it, but it's like late 90s, early 2000s, and I'm just gonna be honest, like I'm watching the Netflix show, but they'll show little clips of what they used to do with the women wrestlers and it's mortifying. This was only like maybe 20 years ago, and some of the things that were, I mean, this was like a full production thing. It's just so like, whoa. So like, I guess I'm glad it's not at that level where it's just like, wow. Um, but I think it's safe to say there's a lot of room to go. I'm just hearing some of my social psych class people and like, some dialogues being like, well, people are trying to survive, but I think it's very tough. And I think if we're talking teenagers and young people on the internet, like it's not real life what you see on the internet. But if you don't know that, I think that can be really challenging. Yeah. Like pornography is like just so a part of male internet culture, whether you're participating or not. It's so present. It's like in jokes and references and all these things. And so I just think that um that's probably why a lot of influencers and content relate to it, because that's a lot of internet traffic. And like I just feel like I don't want to take us all the way, but I think there's just a lot of things that can be helpful and challenging, and nothing on its own is problematic. But I do think some people maybe, you know, need to recognize like what they're engaging with and how that's impacting them and what is gonna show up because they're engaging with a certain part of the internet type of thing.
Well, before I ask my last question, is there any topic points, research points that you wanted to cover for us today?
Um, I would just say that like Audrey is such an expert, and I can't speak with her authority, but I just, they're all different size people and men and tall, short, athletic, non-athletic, and like those are all men. Like, and I think that's just the thing I'd like to say, like whether you're making a lot of money or no money, whether you're strong or not, whether you own things or don't, like you're all men. And I really wish we could try to have more of a dialogue about that, because I think I think in the masculine culture have a scarcity mindset that if I'm saying this other guy's a great man, that I'm less than or something, or I've given up something. And I really wish we could just recognize that me celebrating another man doesn't take from what I'm doing. It just is recognizing the good. Um, so that's maybe just my last thing I would say, just because I don't think we're talking about this enough, and I don't know. I don't know. I just am trying to honestly think too, like if you weren't already interested in mental health and you heard this podcast, like would that change your mind? And I just don't know if it would, Tiffany. So that's where I'm kind of just stuck by that. So I'll pause. I'll rest. I'll rest my case.
Yeah. Well, I wish I mean, professionally, we both know that, like, we can only, change the minds of people who, like, are willing to be open-minded.
Yeah, I sincerely went to I won't say the program or the school. I went to a counseling class. This is a true story. And there's about 50 counselors, some men, not a lot of men are counselors. Shock. But I remember I was talking like self-care, boundaries, and hey, this is a hard job. And if you think I'm not talking to you, you're who I'm talking to. And everyone was pretty much with me. You know, you can tell when you're speaking to a group who's with you. But I'll tell you, the people who are not with me, even at the end, the ones that were looking at me kind of like doubting me, kind of like sizing me up, sending me the like, I think you're full of shit. All the men, I'm just being honest, like all of the men were the ones who had that vibe the whole time and energy. And most of the
Mhm.
time, if I'm speaking to a counseling class, that is who is giving me those vibes. And I'm not saying that I'm the best speaker ever. It's okay to doubt me, but that's something I've noticed that I think even in our profession, we're not absent of some of this.
As you I had a thought that came to mind as you were talking, where I remember encountering an individual who mentioned to me that they had had a male therapist in the past that basically had the mentality of you need to suck it up. And whenever you were talking about that, like, that's what came to my mind, and I was like, "Oh no, oh no."
I I mean, there's different styles of therapy. If that is what verbatim was said, that's very dangerous. Yeah, yeah, I think what's happening in society is happening in therapy. So what's happening for men in therapy is what's happening for men therapists, and so that is one of the I enjoy having dialogue with my other dad clients, you know, with my, you know, other male clients and just talking from that lens, I think can be really empowering sometimes because like I've done my own work and own journey and continue to do that. And so I think it can be helpful to break a chain, one chain piece at a time sometime. But that's all I have. I don't know if you had anything else, Tiffany.
No, I just wanna remind all listeners that, like, seeking help is a sign of strength. It's not a sign of weakness, no matter what gender you choose to identify as. And there's a lot of resources and online resources out there that you can utilize, in the meantime. And then you can always find us on Patreon if you wish to support us and have conversations with us.
Good one. And I'll prep some questions to ask Tiffany next time.
I'll make sure to bring my question hat.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Deciphering Growth. We hope you found our conversation helpful and insightful. Subscribe to our podcast for more episodes and check out our Patreon for more content. Don't hesitate to contact us on social media if you have any questions or comments. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep growing.